I had a friend in junior high school who was super smart. He was one of these science kids that just was always doing experiments. And one day we were walking home from school and he was telling me about this experiment that he had done where he took hydrochloric acid, put it in a Coke bottle, dropped in a piece of lead, and then quickly put a balloon over it, and it filled with hydrogen gas, which is lighter than air. He tied it off and it floated. And he said, "Come on and let me show you." And so I was fascinated by it because, mind you, when I was in junior high, it was pretty rare when you had a helium balloon. They didn't have helium balloons and Mylar balloons in every grocery store you went. So this was a unique situation and a unique opportunity. So he went down into his basement, and sure enough, he got out the Coke bottle and he poured in the hydrochloric acid, he dropped in the lead and put the balloon over it, and it filled up with what I presume was hydrogen gas, and he tied it off, and sure enough, it floated. Well, he was excited because I was thrilled with his experiment, and so he said, "Well, let me give you some hydrochloric acid." And he gave me a little bottle of it and some lead and a balloon, and you can try it at home. So I ran home. I couldn't wait, threw my books aside, ran down to the basement, found a Coke bottle, and poured the hydrochloric acid in just as he had showed me, dropped in the piece of lead, and I put the balloon over it, and sure enough, it filled up with hydrogen gas. I tied it off and I let it go. The only problem is it didn't float. It just sunk to the ground. I was incredibly disappointed and I couldn't understand why Drew's worked and mine didn't. So I ran upstairs. My stepfather Bill was home. He was sitting at the kitchen table, my mom next to him, and I told him my dilemma. I thought surely he would know what to do. And sure enough, he paused for a moment and then he said, well, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his cigarette lighter, holding the balloon in the other hand, and he said, well, let's heat up these molecules and see if we can't get them moving and then it'll float. Well, I barely knew what a molecule was, so I assumed he did and knew what he was talking about. I soon found out he didn't know what he was talking about, because no sooner than he struck the flame than that balloon exploded, I kid you not, in a ball of fire so intense that he immediately began batting his eyes, trying to refocus them from this flash of fire that had just momentarily blinded him, not to mention that it had singed his eyebrows and the hair on both of his arms. Fortunately, he wasn't seriously hurt and it didn't burn the house down. I've never seen anything quite like that since. As I think about that incident and the decades that I've lived as a Christian, I think about how many times I tried taking biblical truth and applying it to certain situations in my life only to have the situation get worse, not better. And I realized that it's because I didn't know how to apply the word. I think of what Paul writes in his second letter to Timothy. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. I've learned that it is so important to rightly handle the word of truth, because when we do, we can with great confidence take what it says, apply it to the various difficult and challenging situations in our lives, and it will always come through. We read through the words of the prophet Isaiah that God's word will not go forth and return void without accomplishing the purpose for which it was sent.